This way a little bit. There you go. Okay. So today we're going to talk about evolution.
Yeah.
You probably never talked about evolution in your school.
No clue.
Okay. So evolution is kind of like change over time. And we know like rocks change, like erosion can take place, but animals can change as well. Okay. So we're going to introduce evolution. All right. So as I said, evolution is change over time. That's all it means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in biology is a series of facts and observations, hypotheses about history of life. So how biology deals with evolution is it talks about, it gives the facts and the language to explain how organisms change over time. All right. And evolution is a unifying principle of biology, right? It explains how living things are related from the smallest cells to the largest animals. What that's saying is if we go way, way back to when like the earth, before the dinosaurs, when the earth first formed, right?
Yeah.
There were no living things on earth. Yeah. And all of a sudden, one day, there was like this really, really small organism called a cell.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're made of like trillions and trillions of cells, smaller things. Right? But there was one, and all living things ended up evolving from that one cell. So you know what's kind of crazy is if you go back far enough, you have an ancestor that's a dinosaur.
I do.
Yeah. Is that crazy?
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, if you go back far enough, we're all related to each other. So we're related to Woody, right? Our dog. If we go back far enough, dogs and humans, right? Obviously, though, what's a closer relationship? Do you have a closer relationship to me or a closer relationship to a dinosaur? Yeah, of course, right? Dinosaurs are millions and millions of years ago, which you probably don't even understand what that means. Okay.
I know what dinosaurs are.
We know dinosaurs. Okay. So the person...
And turtles.
Yep, turtles. Darwin talked about turtles. So the person who really developed this idea or this theory of evolution, natural selection, is this guy named Charles Darwin. Okay. And he sailed around the world, right? And he sailed around the world he was from Great Britain. He's from England. Okay. And he sailed around the world on this boat called the HMS Beagle.
That means?
Well, it's the name of their boat, right? All at this time, yeah, good question. HMS stands for Her Majesty's Ship. Because back at this time, right, the Queen of England controlled everything. Yeah. So they always kind of noted the HMS Beagle, the HMS Voyager, the HMS whatever, because Her Majesty's Ship. It recognized that it was a British ship.
What does Beagle mean?
Beagle's just a name. Beagle's like a dog. They call it the Beagle. I don't know. Okay. And what he did is he sailed around the world and he studied all these different plants and animals. He collected them as they traveled around the world. Okay.
Wow.
This is where he sailed. So he started in England up here, right? And he sailed all the way down South America, right around the tip of South America, visited all these coastlines here in South America, always up here. He went to this very small group of islands known as the Galapagos Islands. I would love to go to the Galapagos Islands.
What about Hawaii?
Hawaii's like out over here. Where do we live? Do you know where we live?
We live like closer up to there.
Yeah, North America. So we're like up there. All right, good. He traveled all the way around over to Australia, New Zealand, right? All these different places. And what he saw was he saw all these different organisms, collected all these different organisms. And what he saw a lot of diversity. And we'll talk more about this later, but what he really focused on was the diversity of life, which is biodiversity, which we're going to talk about today. But he also kind of realized how there's uniformity in life, right? Like if you have wolves here in North America and you have hyenas in Africa, you know what a hyena is?
Yeah.
A hyena from like Lion King, the bad guys. Okay. They're different species, but if you look at their bodies, don't they look kind of similar to each other a little bit? Different, but similar.
Like
there's some
foxes,
and foxes are like the same body plan. They're different colors, different species, but there's some similarities between them. So we noticed like the huge biodiversity, but he also noticed the similarities between them. Okay. So living diversity. Darwin was overwhelmed by the living diversity. He saw a variety of plants and animals, right? So he was like amazed by how many different plants and animals he found in the world. And obviously he found a very, very small amount of living things in this world. We estimate that there's about 31 million different species in this world, different types of animals. Guess how many of them we've actually discovered?
What?
About 1.75. So most living organisms in this world we've never even discovered. Is that crazy?
Wait.
We've never found them. They're hidden somewhere, like deep down the ocean somewhere, maybe. Species that we don't even know what they are.
Wait.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, wait.
All right. So, God, quick.
Wait, what about like the fish with like the
anglerfish?
Yeah.
But we know that one. So that's one of the 1.75 that we know. There's another 29 million that we don't know of yet. All right. So today we call this diversity. We call it biodiversity. Biodiversity is a good thing. It's defined as the variety of living organisms, the genetic information they contain, and the biological communities in which they live. So that's what biodiversity is. This big concept, but it's a good thing. So with biodiversity, we focus 3 levels of biodiversity. We focus at ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity. Genetic is like what makes you you, like your DNA, like what makes you you. You don't know what DNA is, but that's okay. These guys do. Okay, so ecosystems are communities of organisms and their living environments. So we know what an ecosystem is, right? We have populations, group of populations can form a community, communities, all the populations together. And then you go to the next level, ecosystems, right? Ecosystems are living factors, all the organisms there, and all the non-living factors like the wind, the water, and we call that abiotic factors, okay? So ecosystem diversity includes a variety of habitats, living communities, and ecological processes in the living world. There are a ton of ecosystems in our world, and the more diversity we have in our ecosystems, the healthier our world is. Hence the concept of climate change or habitat loss, right? That really disrupts ecosystem diversity. And in biology, in really life, a major concept is variation is healthy. Variation is good. So the more ecosystems we have, more diversity we have at ecosystem level, the healthier our biosphere is, our world is. Okay. Now, the next one is species diversity. So the first thing we have to do is we have to define what a species is. Okay. So a species like a type of animal. So like a dog is a species, right? Humans we are a species, right?
Yeah.
Blue jays are a species. Cardinals outside, we have cardinals and blue jays in our yard. Cardinals and blue jays are species as well, okay? So a species is a group of similar looking organisms that can successfully reproduce. It means they can have babies, right? Mm-hmm. So this right here, this is a donkey. That's a horse.
Yeah.
Okay. You ever heard of a mule?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I have a donkey and a horse and they have a baby, it's called a mule. But the mule can't reproduce on its own, can't have its own babies.
What?
It's weird, right? So it's just there, but it can't have more mules. You can only make mules by crossing a donkey and a horse. Okay. But that tells us because the mules can't have babies of their own, donkeys and horses, are they the same species or are they different species? They're different species. So that's how we define species. The ability to produce fertile, viable offspring. A donkey is one species. Donkeys can reproduce and all their offspring can produce more donkeys. Horses can reproduce and all their offspring can produce more horses. If I cross a horse and a donkey, they're genetically close enough to each other that they can make an organism, a mule, but that mule is infertile. It can't reproduce on its own. So that defines horses and donkeys as different species. Now, could Woody, we have a lab, could a lab and a golden retriever, they're 2 different breeds of dogs, but could they have new puppies? Yeah, and they'd be like a mix between like a golden retriever and a Labrador. So that tells us that Labrador retrievers and golden retrievers, right? They're the same species. They're just different breeds of dogs. Okay. So each species has its own gene pool, which is the set of genes that are shared by all the members in that population. And what that means is, so each species has all of its genes that kind of collectively we call it the gene pool. Okay, so that species, now species diversity is the variety of species that exist on Earth, right? So ecosystem diversity is the number of different ecosystems there are. Species diversity is the number of different species there are. Right? Again, variation is key. Variation is good. So the more species there are in an ecosystem, the more species there are in the world, our biosphere, right, the healthier it is. So if you look at climate change, you look at habitat loss, and you look at the loss of species, right, that is a negative for our world, right? More species is better. Okay. So in an ecosystem, each species, plant, animal, unicellular organisms are important for the health and survival of the whole ecosystem, right? Variation is key. Okay. The last one is genetic diversity. And you're not really going to understand this, but genetic diversity is the diversity within a species. So I could have a species where genetically they're all very, very similar to each other, or I could have a species where genetically their DNA is very different from each other, right? Genetic diversity, having a lot of differences genetically between organisms, is key. Right. So in general, refers to the sum total of all the different forms of genetic information carried by all organisms living on Earth today. All right. Within a species refers to the total variation of alleles in the gene pool. So we're going to talk about genetic diversity on a species level, right? The more different types of alleles, forms of genes there are, right, the more species genetic diversity you have. Okay. So the concept on this is, I'm going to talk about cheetahs. You know, cheetahs really, really fast.
Yeah, I know cheetahs.
Okay. Cheetahs have very, very little genetic diversity. Their population was decimated from hunting and from habitat loss. So if you look at the cheetahs, they're very, very close genetically to each other, almost to the point that they're all kind of cousins in a sense. They're very, very close relationship to each other, which means
kind of like tigers, and they're like a wildcat.
Yeah, they're a wildcat, but there's very little diversity in their population, which means they have a lot of poor genetic traits that show up because they're so closely related to each other, right? If there was a bacterial disease that happened to hit the cheetah population, because they're all genetically similar to each other, there's a chance that disease could wipe out a lot of them, right? So to kind of change that with humans, we have a lot of genetic diversity in the human population. So if a disease hits, there's some people that might be affected and some people might not be affected by it because there's a lot of genetic diversity there. So genetic diversity at the species level is key.
And most animals go extinct.
It can happen. It can happen. It happens sometimes. All right. So this is just basically the introduction to natural selection. We're going to get more into the details of natural selection, but we just kind of define different levels of genetic diversity, ecosystem diversity, and species diversity. So hopefully that helps. And I will talk to you tomorrow. See you later.
Black.